is not the end! This is only the beginning!
G'day audiophiles, this is the Sirens of Audio. My name is Dwayne. We are the podcast dedicated to Doctor Who in the audio medium, and joining me is Philip. G'day Philip.
G'day Dwayne, g'day everyone.
Well, this is a very exciting edition of the Sirens of Audio. We've got a few other episodes in the can, but this is literally the last episode that I'm going to be recording on the road for some time. Next time we get together, I'm going to be back in my office in Tasmania.
Oh, you must be disappointed to not have to sit in a hot car and record. It'd be really sad for you.
I know. Oh, man. The Jury Rig Studios I've had to do. Actually, one of the most interesting podcasts that I did was the one that we did a while back with Nabil Shaban. We recorded his interview when I was in Darwin. I think we did some linking stuff and talked about his Big Finish episodes when I was in Alice Springs. And then I finished editing it and put it out in Port Lincoln. So the whole length of Australia, that podcast had been worked on. So that was a very, very interesting one.
A well-travelled podcast.
A very well-travelled podcast. Nabil was in Scotland. So it's like very, very international podcast, that one. But do you want to hear my tragic Doctor Who story on this particular road trip?
Oh, is it going to make me cry?
It could do. It could well do.
Dear.
It'll more than likely just make you laugh. During my travels, there's been some DVDs and box sets released. For instance, I bought the Season 14 Blu-rays. They were released in July, so I grabbed them when I was in Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. But I haven't had access to a Blu-ray player since then, so I still haven't watched them. So I'm excited to get home and get that set into my Blu-ray player. But the other thing that was released not long after that was the special edition of Power of the Daleks. So I bought that on DVD, and what was interesting was that there was a third disc on there that contained an episode featuring Pat Troughton, his earliest TV appearance, 1953, I think. It was Robin Hood. He was playing Robin Hood. And so what I did was I'd started watching it, but at the same time that I was watching this episode and watching a few other DVDs as well, my TV in my caravan packed it in. So I stopped watching the TV. I eventually, because it's a new caravan, I was able to get a new TV on warranty, but I had to wait till, where was I? Ceduna in South Australia, where my TV got sent to. So I went to Ceduna, picked up my new TV. In the meantime, I'd thrown out my old TV, and after I got my new TV, that was working fine. I'd read the Michael Troughton biography of his dad, Patrick Troughton, and thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll go and check out that Robin Hood episode. And I open up my Power of the Daleks case, and that DVD is missing, and my heart sank. Because when my TV stopped working, I was watching that DVD and I'd gone and thrown out my TV. So somewhere in a bin inside a television is disc 3 of the special edition of Power of the Daleks. Tragic?
It's awful. One day, missing episode people will go searching through trash cans looking for that disc because all other discs will have been destroyed by the BBC in a fire.
I know. Maybe I've saved that particular episode. You never know. But it just meant I had to go out and buy a whole new set. So there was $30 down the tube. But anyway, I wanted to see that Robin Hood episode. And then when I went to watch it, there's only about 10 minutes there. Half of the episode was missing.
Oh, no.
Anyway, the subject of today's podcast is scary stories, and particularly scary stories on Big Finish. But I want to ask you, Philip, did you have any scary memories of Doctor Who growing up? What were some of your scariest episodes that you can recall as a younger person?
Wow, that's interesting. The first show I ever saw was The Masker Men Dragora, and certainly Hieronymus freaked me out a heap. And there's a scene where he pulls off his mask and he's just this glowing face. So I think that was the first thing that actually probably hooked me to the show, was this terrifying human figure with just a glowing face in the end.
So that was a cliffhanger?
That was a cliffhanger. So that's probably what caught me into Doctor Who, was those sort of cliffhanger things. I certainly remember Talons of Weng Chiang being scary and freaking me out. I've always been amused by people who hide behind sofas, because that's never been something I've been particularly into. So I mean, I do like being a bit scared. But for me, Doctor Who was always more about the tales and things, and often the emotion is more powerful.
So the scariest moments for me as a kid, I still remember my first episode. Must have been a repeat, because I would have been too young to catch it on first transmission. Actually, no, I wouldn't have been born. Spearhead from Space. Episode 2, do you remember when Ransom goes into the factory and the Auton comes to life behind him, and that's the cliffhanger? It's not actually a doctor or companion cliffhanger. I still recall that, and the feeling of utter terror that coursed through me. Some other cliffhangers, I would have to say Deadly Assassin Part 3? No, Deadly Assassin Part 2 was the one where the train coming. I found that a really terrifying cliffhanger as well. And it's interesting you say Talons of Wang Chiang. I don't remember cliffhangers as much as such, but I was quite terrified by Mr. Sin. So that was also one that featured very heavily in my early memory. So, definitely Spearhead from Space was still really terrifying. I still find that my favourite Auton story. Don't know why they changed the Autons so dramatically for Terror of the Autons, but they had a sound that like a kind of whirring sound whenever the Autons were active in Spearhead from Space that wasn't there in Terror of the Autons. So I don't find those ones as scary, because you can combine the look of the Autons in Spearhead with that sound. That's kind of what did it for me. And seeing as we're speaking of sound, we're going to talk about a couple of audio stories. I put some questions up on social media. What's your scariest story from Big Finish? Some of them said were along the same lines as me and you. Some of them said The Red Lady. Some of them said Night Thoughts. I keep getting those two titles mixed up. Night Thoughts. So let's cover Night Thoughts straight away, shall we? It was a Seventh Doctor Hex and Ace story, and set in this eerie mansion on a Scottish island. And what was interesting about that story is the fact that it was supposed to be for season 27. It was an idea that was originally floated at that time, which is something I didn't know. So it was a story that was virtually a lost story, made for Big Finish before the lost stories were even a thing. Did you know that, Philip?
I hadn't known that till you told me, so that's interesting. I looked up the writer, which was Edward Young, and he's done no other Big Finish. So this is his one only, and it makes sense now that you say it was like a lost story. That does make sense, that he obviously wrote it for season 27, and Big Finish nabbed it. Yeah,
and I know nothing about that writer. Did you do some research on him? Has he done anything else that you're aware of?
Nothing for Big Finish. I didn't look any further than that. I ran out of time.
Okay. So as I was listening to this story, I kept thinking to myself, hang on, this is not as scary as I remember. And I was wondering why I was thinking Night Thoughts was so scary. And I think it was because of this trailer for it.
Will you walk into my parlour? Said the spider to the fly.
Not all photographs bring happy memories.
There was a toy, a kid's doll on the table, and a guy called Haiti. Or something. No, Hearty, I think. And they were trying to force him to operate.
I hereby certify that I am taking my own life. No one else is involved and no one else should be punished. 10 years ago, I made a terrible error of judgment, and God alone will be my judge. My one wish is that I am not mourned. No funeral, no flowers, no fuss. You will all know what this means.
So, this is to be a battle of the minds, is it, Doctor?
So nice of you to come unarmed.
Please don't hurt me. I've told you before. It wasn't me, it was the others. I argued your case. Please, leave me in peace. Go away!
Will you walk into my parlour? Said the spider to the fly.
Mother dead, father gone. We think your sister's drowned.
You know what's really freaking me out here? You. Sat here telling me all this so rationally. I've just tied up a devious clinical psychopath, and now I'm actually listening to what you've got to say.
This is a message from the future. Repeat. This is a message from the future.
Will you walk into my parlour? Said the spider to the fly.
Hex! Where the hell are you? Yeah, alright, I'm lost. And I can't see a thing. Keep calling and I'll run towards you.
No! Don't run! For God's sake, don't run!
That's it! Keep calling!
Ace! Ace!
Ace!
They killed her! They killed my baby! Thought she was dead! Tried to mask it out! Which one did it? Which one? I'll hunt them! I'll slice the truth out of them one by one! Gouge it out like my baby's eyes! And then...
Will you walk into my parlour? Said the spider to the fly.
So there you go. That was the trailer for Night Thoughts. Did you find this one particularly scary yourself?
I think I have a very high scare threshold anyway. There's certainly a lot of stuff in it I found quite macabre. The characters are quite interesting and confronting because it's hard to know who to like, if anyone. And certainly there's a bit of a Agatha Christie feel of, and then there was Nana's characters start dying one by one, and how they die is all a bit confusing. So there's certainly enough stuff in there that is creepy. So yeah, if you find creepy scary, then there's a lot of creep in there.
Yeah, you've got a anorak figure going through the house whistling this strange tune. Well, it's not strange. It turns out to be Oranges and Lemons, doesn't it? There's also a familiar voice in there in Bernard Kay, isn't there, who appeared in Dalek Invasion of Earth and Colony in Space. Did he appear in anything else? They're the two that I can think of off the top of my head.
That sounds right. I certainly hadn't picked up his voice until I looked at the credits afterwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought his voice was very, very distinctive. I always get Bernard Kay mixed up with the actor. I can't remember his name. The actor who played the leader of the Axons. I always found those two voices very similar.
Yes, it was certainly a voice I recognised. I just couldn't work out where from.
Yeah, so I always thought it was Bernard Kay being the Axon leader, but it wasn't. It was someone completely different. But yeah, the story certainly starts off like it could definitely be
it's Bernard Holly, I think. I think Bernard Holly is who does the Axon. So it's both Bernards.
The two Bernards.
The two Bernards. And you are right, both those very deep lyrical voices.
Yeah. And it definitely does sound like it could be something from season 26. Like we've got a couple of episodes there where the Doctor and Ace are just inserted into the story. There's already seems to be some kind of undercurrent already there in the Seventh Doctor, and I think this story is just a continuation of that kind of idea. And what did you think of the story itself, Philip? I thought it was I listened to this a couple of times, and I got more out of it on the second listen because it's very, very complex and it's timey-wimey.
Timey-wimey. It's interesting because really, for a show about time, Doctor Who didn't do much time until we got to the new series. And particularly Stephen Moffat's the one who likes to play with time probably more than anybody else. So it's interesting because it is timey-wimey. And I couldn't decide whether it was a cheat or not. There's a bit of a cheat with what the Seventh Doctor does to try and solve the situation. I've been trying to work out whether it worked properly or not. I didn't have a second listen maybe at the time. So maybe you can say whether the Doctor's timey-wiminess worked properly, because I got confused in terms of why there wouldn't be more knowledge of him with what they did. But I might be confused. I might be wrong there. But certainly in terms of how the setup is, in terms of how they reveal bits of the story and characters' past and background for each character, it's feeding you little gems along the way, which just keep building to lead you to the climax. So I think that works well.
I think I know what you're referring to as to whether the Seventh Doctor's cheat paid off. Because right towards the end, I think in episode 4, I audibly gasped and thought, no, the Doctor can't do that. He did something that was totally against type, totally against character. And then we discover, it was a bit of a spoiler now, but it didn't happen the way it was portrayed on the story. Happened a little bit differently. So, yes, I think it did work, and I enjoyed it a lot more on the second listen. I think I was having too much of a casual listen. This is a story that you really have to listen to, and I'm surprised really that Edward Young didn't do anything else. I'd be curious to know what the story is behind that, because I think he did quite a good job at nailing these characters. I found them all very interesting. They all had like Curse of Fenric had quite a huge backstory, with Millington and Judson and all those different characters that was explored in the novel. But this one too had some characters with quite heavy backstories that were fleshed out really nicely. I thought it was great.
It's certainly a very popular show, and it's one that has stuck in people's minds. I know over Halloween, Big Finish did a bit of scary shows, and this was one of the ones that kept coming up too. So not only did people on our page keep mentioning this as a scary story, it's mentioned more widely too. So when people think of scary Big Finish, this is the one they turn to. But for me, it's macabre. And there's a lot of stuff towards the end that's thinking, very macabre, very black. But yeah, engaging. I did enjoy it, and I think starting with Hex and His Nightmare, it set the feel of foreboding from the very start, and also just with the Doctor's controlling situations and Hex's distrust of the Doctor. I think because Ace trusts the Doctor so completely, Hex is far more cynical about what the Doctor's up to. Is he good or not? And the fact that both companions don't trust the Doctor completely makes you more uncomfortable. Like, can we actually trust the Doctor will fix this situation properly? So when Ace always trusts him, it's never an issue. But now having Hex, who's a lot more nervous about, can the Doctor be trusted? Will he do what's right? And as you say, there's certainly a scene in there. It doesn't feel like the Doctor's doing what is right at all. It takes us off our sure footing with what we can trust about the Doctor, what we can trust. I think this story often puts us on the wrong foot all the time, which makes it more unsettling.
Absolutely. So that's Night Thoughts. Another one that was suggested by you. I suggested Night Thoughts. You suggested The Red Lady by John Dorney. That was also picked by a couple on social media when I asked the question as well. What is it about... Well, let's get the context of The Red Lady. And it's part of Doom Coalition. So Doom Coalition had 4 box sets, and this is part of box set number 1. So it's only the second in a 16-story arc.
Come to gloat, Doctor. On the contrary, I came to see if there was anything you wanted to say. Any final words?
The 8th Doctor box set. Doom Coalition, Volume 1.
Your home planet?
Gallifrey. It usually starts with them all pointing guns at me and goes downhill from there. Oh, hello, Padrak.
Her hand, she's reaching out to take off her mask. You can see that, can't you?
I couldn't help noticing, just then.
Yes.
Another personality emerged.
I take it you've come to me because of my particular affliction.
You don't understand! It's her face! Her face! Her terrible face!
What's that noise?
Can't be. Liv, run!
You're Helen Sinclair, language scholar, British Museum.
You know my word.
No, I read the sign on the door. But that doesn't matter. Helen, this tablet is vital to the safety of the cosmos.
The man calls himself the Doctor.
What? Is he here?
Galileo, how good to see you again.
Commence dissection.
What? Save me! They're coming! Liv Shenka. She's right here.
Where will this contraption take us?
To the end of the line, Mr. Payne. To the end of the line.
Big Finish. We love stories.
Let's give the Doctor the welcome he so richly deserves.
So I'll go back to the question, Philip. What is it about the Red Lady that makes it scary for you?
Well, just a little bit of background. So just Doom Coalition itself, I thought, was just a great concept. So I think people probably know that Paul McGann had been doing a lot of stories. They had the double companions with Charlie and then Lucy, and then had sort of wrapped up those regular releases. And so Big Finish decided that the best thing to do with Paul McGann now is actually start doing box sets. And so they started trying that and started with the whole Dark Eye series, which introduced a new companion, which worked quite well. But I actually think with Doom Coalition is when Big Finish actually got these huge 16-part stories together. And so Doom Coalition is this idea of introducing a whole series of villains that are going to keep building up, reoccurring, to a huge conclusion at the end. So it's still very early. It's only the second episode in that whole 16-part series. And we've had the companion Liv Chenka, played amazingly by Nicola Walker, who is just one of Britain's best actresses. So she's amazing. But they decided to add another companion to the Doctor. So this is when Hattie Monahan joined the cast, playing Helen Sinclair. So this is her first episode. So I think because they're introducing a new companion, they have to give her a lot to do, and they set a lot of backstory. So it's set in the 60s, and it's set in a museum. So I think the location starts off well, but I think it just starts with a murder. And so I think the fact it starts in such a unsure what's going on here sort of way, and I think what builds the fear is it's something that's coming. So I think fear where you know there's something there and coming is always scarier. And where this story turns on, it's a character that is coming from the far distance but is slowly approaching. So, bit of a spoiler in terms of the Red Lady is start off by being seen in a tapestry as just a tiny red dot. But every time the character looks again, the character is coming closer and closer. So I think the reason why this is so scary is because this fear builds over time as it keeps approaching. And each time you see the Red Lady, the person who's seeing the Red Lady who's coming to kill them, there's a little bit more of a reveal. And it's interesting because it's such a visual concept, the idea of having someone approaching you from the distance and being able to see a lot more. You'd think you wouldn't be able to tell that story in an audio format. But John Dorney, who's written the script, has done such a good job that each time it's described, and it works across a number of different sort of media. Each time she's described, a little bit more is revealed, which makes it just a bit more scary. And then when she finally does appear to the person, that's just doom for them. As I just mentioned too, that this won the 10th Annual Scribe Awards in 2016. So this was viewed as one of the best pieces of audio writing there was in 2016, which I think is why it's so powerful. So for me, why is it scary? It's because bit by bit the danger is being revealed, and in classic way, it happens to one person, and so when the other characters start revealing what's going on, it's coming for them as well. And so it's that slow reveal, bit by bit, of what's coming, and you know the end result is death, and you just keep seeing step by step this person coming. I think it's part of it. It's what they do so well in Blink with the angels. That it's if the angel has got you, it wouldn't be scary, but it's the fact that the angel keeps coming every time you blink, closer, 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 and you're got. And this is what John does so well with his story. What about you? How did you find the story, Dwayne? Did you find this scary, Dwayne?
I did, but I didn't find it as scary as I thought I would. Potentially because I'm not sure how you feel about these massive arcs. Obviously, we've said a couple of times now that this is the second part of a 16-part story, basically. And we're introducing a new companion here who, incidentally, I found that she had a lot in common with Hex in Night Thoughts. And Hex went on to have a very tragic story, or right from the beginning, basically, when Hex, we found out who he was related to in The Harvest. His story could only be tragic, really. But then we've got the new character Helen coming on, who by the end of the story virtually cannot stay in her time period unless she goes off with the Doctor. Starts off that way, and I think her journey, it's obviously still ongoing, but there is an element of tragedy to her, at least for some time, particularly in at the end of Doom Coalition and then Ravenous as well. So I was focusing a lot on the character, and I thought it was an interesting line at the end of the story where, was it Liv or Helen? It might have been Liv who said, "What was all that, Doctor?" And the Doctor says, "I have absolutely no idea." So I kind of felt like, I've just spent an hour listening to this story and I still don't know what's going to happen, but also in the back of my mind knowing that the payoff is going to come because I'm going to keep having to listen to Doom Coalition to find out more about this particular adversary. Yeah, the aspect of something getting closer and closer it is very scary when you actually visualize it. I found myself looking at the cover a lot during listening to this and just zooming in on the red lady in the tapestry that you see on the cover. There were a couple of times when I thought, I better not look her in the eye. So yeah, I can see why people consider this to be a scary story, but in some ways I find this story just to be part of a massive whole, which being such I find it to be far less self-contained. Is that what I'm saying? Far less self-contained than Night Thoughts, for instance, which is a particular setting. The story's sort of resolved by the end, although I didn't mention from Night Thoughts that it's got an absolutely horrific ending to Night Thoughts. I don't think I've heard another Big Finish story that ends quite like Night Thoughts. And that's quite fear-inducing as well, considering that it was the Doctor who caused that ending as well. So I don't think that in Night Thoughts the Doctor had any kind of win scenario. He was going to lose whatever he did. But this one, yeah, it was part of that big whole. I can see why people think it was scary, but I do think there are scarier Big Finish stories out there. But when we talked to John Dorney, he specifically wrote that to be scary. So he was trying to achieve that, and I think he did. The sound effects were good, and I think for me, in an audio story, it's the sound that does it. Like Night Thoughts, it was the whistling. I thought the tape recorder of the Seventh Doctor going, that kept being played back, saying, "Will you come into my parlour?" said the spider to the fly. There's nothing quite as scary as Sylvester McCoy's voice on a tape recorder going backward and forward. I found that very scary. Yeah. Yep. I thought that was brilliant. So in terms of audio fear inducement, I found Night Thoughts to be scarier. But yeah, I did enjoy this. Just not quite as scary. Were there
I just think the acting is just, to me, the acting is so, in both productions, the acting is so well done. But for me, the Red Lady, I guess it's the desperation. And I guess, partly because they're setting up a new companion, so Helen actually saves the day and saves the Doctor and saves Liv, which, the 60s woman, it was important that they actually give her agency and make her competent if she's going to join the team. But I think seeing the Doctor and seeing Liv both so desperate to almost be destroyed, the need to keep looking, the need to keep going back, that to me is when you're the Doctor and the companion, both of them are, and at this stage Helen's not a companion, they're both so lost, and the only way of being saved is someone you don't know. I think that was part of what added to it. But yeah, brilliant audios. Yeah, I just love stories. What can I say?
Yeah, for sure. A notable mention, which we should probably touch on, and it's a story that I thought of choosing as well, was Scherzo, the Rob Shearman story, which was the first one in the Divergent Universe arc from the Eighth Doctor and Charlie. They were the only two actors in it. People were throwing that up as being very scary, and I remember you saying at the time when I mentioned that to you that you couldn't work out why it was scary. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. In terms of it, for me, it was watching these two characters. I guess they're caught in this nothingness, but watching these two characters relate. So to me, it's a very personal character piece, and I really hadn't thought about it as being scary.
Yeah, for me, Scherzo is probably one of the few audio stories that I have physically jumped out of my chair in. And it's not the story itself, because you're right. It is a character-based story about the relationship between Charlie and the Doctor. But the sound design in that one, when you've got that creature that's evolving around them based on them, or are they evolving into, I think there's evolution experiment
all
going on there. Yeah, all that stuff. I can't remember the exact detail, but the sound, there are some sounds in there that absolutely, if you're wearing headphones, it blasts your eardrums, and it is really, really scary. I can see where people come from, which is interesting, because one that people didn't mention, or if they did, I can't remember, but one of the early Big Finish audios, Whispers of Terror. Do you remember that one?
Yes.
That was about a creature who lived in audio waves, I think, and it was entirely a creature based on sound. So they were really using the medium to tell that particular scary story. So Whispers of Terror would be another one that I would suggest would be a very, very scary Big Finish story. And for me personally, I get where you're coming from with the Red Lady now, because you're looking at the characters and their reaction to what's happening. Whereas for me, I'm listening to the macabre elements of the story and getting freaked out by those. So I think we're hearing them from slightly different perspectives, which is awesome.
It is. Actually, it makes me think about Scherzo. I guess what Rob Shearman does in Scherzo too is he cuts away every sense except for hearing, and that's because
that's right.
they're blinded because it's so bright they can't see. They're holding hands, but even by the end of that, they can't feel anymore because they just lose all sense because of sense deprivation. So all you have is sound, and it's just a lot of it's just footsteps, lots and lots of footsteps. And of course, the first element of fear is always the footsteps behind you. And so I can understand why with that just footsteps, and as you say, there's that screech that comes in at times that is certainly the jump scare. And just watching what is going to happen to these characters as they lose all their senses. So it's a perfect audio story because it becomes audio is their only sense that they have.
Yeah.
And thought about that. Well, maybe thank you, Dwayne.
Very good. All right. Well, that's our scary story episode for this installment of the Sirens of Audio. It's time for our recommendations. What have you got for us this time, Philip?
Well, I'm going to recommend a podcast which I've only just discovered. So we had Paul Morris. We talked to him, and before we spoke to him, you'd recommended Something Who. And so I've gone looking and searching for Something Who. I've listened to a number of episodes and subscribed to that now, and really enjoying it. A very thought-provoking, thoughtful discussions, discussion between classic and modern Who, but just hearing the conversation between the guys and what they have to say. Really, that's been capturing my attention for the last few days. What about you, Dwayne? What have you been listening to?
I want to recommend a podcast as well, but this is not Doctor Who related. One of my passions is classic rock, particularly progressive rock. And one of the artists that I've talked about on this show before, who is probably king of the pile when it comes to progressive rock in the modern era, and in fact the last 30 years, is Stephen Wilson. And he, along with a fellow band member, he had a band called No Man in the 90s that was quite commercially successful. It was a duo project with Tim Bonus. He and Tim are doing a podcast called The Album Years, where they pick a year from what they refer to as the classic album years between 1960, I think 65, and the end of the century. They're the classic album years. So they pick a random year and they talk about their favourite albums from that particular year. So it's not in the years aren't in any particular order, but I can hardly recommend that to get their perspective. They don't always agree, which is often good in a podcast. It's good to get different views.
Oh, I don't agree with that.
Well, I do, so there. The album years. Check that out. That's my recommendation for this week. So we can announce the next couple of shows because we've got them in the can. I said this was going to be the last one that we record, but we have recorded a couple that I'm delaying the release for. So next time, and if you've probably noticed by now, but we are dropping episodes on Thursdays in Australia. So it could be late Wednesdays in the UK or early Thursday morning in the UK, depends what time it is. But it is going to be Thursdays from now on, first 4 Thursdays of the month. So this being the third Thursday of the month, we've got one more for November, and that will be Paul Morris. He's coming on to chat with us about all things Big Finish, particularly his work in Big Finish, and we're gonna touch on the subject of the talons of Wang Chiang, a contentious subject, but I don't think it's something that we shouldn't talk about. So it's interesting conversation. We'll get to that next time. And first podcast in December we've got in the can too, so we can announce that. It's going to be... Oh, Philip, you tell us who it's going to be.
It's the amazing Janet Fielding, who played Tegan Javanka. So Janet's coming and talking to us and talking about life, the universe, and Doctor Who. Yeah, and life in lockdown, recording in lockdown, what that's like. So that's going to be great. But if you like what you hear with the Sirens, please do give us a review, give us some feedback on iTunes, because apparently that helps with getting people finding us. Rate us on any podcatcher, actually. That would be fantastic. Do check out our website, sirensofaudio.com. We're slowly putting up written reviews as well, just short reads, 2-minute reads, that you can have a look at. Some of our favourites and some that we've been listening to recently. We're not too negative, are we, Philip? We usually love what we hear, so you can rest it. But we might give you some thoughts and opinions and ways of looking at stories that you may not have thought of yourself. So check that out. We're on Twitter at Audio Sirens. We've got a Facebook page as well. Any final thoughts, Philip? No. Night thoughts. Good to watch.
Don't. Night thoughts are not good. They're very scary. All right. Until you hear from us again, continue, dear listener, to listen to lots of lovely audio, because audio drama rocks! Hang on, I lost my train of thought there. Getting hot and stuffy in the car now.